ladies and gentlemen. I am very glad that Uni-Korea Foundation could co-host this global conference with Association of Political Science in Korea as a plenary session in IPSA World Conference. Uni-Korea Foundation was established with private resources about 10 years ago as part of efforts to prepare for peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Today, we are witnessing significant changes in the international landscape, such as the emergence of the President Trump's new North Korea policy and the growing strategic rivalry between the US and China. As we consider the prospects for reunification of the Korean Peninsula, we are deeply interested in how these global developments will affect the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, it is highly meaningful for us that renowned scholars from around the world have gathered here today to discuss these issues together. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all participants as well as all presenters who traveled from afar, and in particular to Professor John Aickenberry, Dr. Eric Balmach, and Professor Yoon Young-wan for presenting the main topics at this seminar. Furthermore, I hope that these seminars will serve as a meaningful platform for promoting peace and reunification on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
Yes, my name is Bom Kim. As I introduced, I am serving as the president of Korean Political Science Association. On behalf of Korean Political Science Association, I would like to welcome all of you to participate today's session. As already mentioned, this session and the next section was organized to commemorate the 80th anniversary of Korea liberation from Japan, and additionally 10th anniversary of the Uni-Korea Foundation. Today, we invite three speakers, presenters, Professor John Aickenbery. Please have a big applause. And Eric Balba, Dr. Eric Balba. And Professor Yoon Young-kwan. And we also invite three discussants. Professor Jeon Jae-sung, Professor Kim Yong-min, Professor Jung Koo-eun. Because time is limited, we will have a 20 minutes presentation from each presenter, and then we will have a 5 minutes discussion for each presentation. Then we will start with Professor John Aickenbery's presentation.
It's a great opportunity at a very contested, uncertain moment in global politics to talk about peace and stability, unification on the Korean Peninsula. And in some ways, what I want to do, that's a daunting topic, is to pull back and in some sense look at the prospects for peace on the Korean Peninsula from the outside in rather than from the inside out, to look at Trump 2.0 and to discuss what that might mean for the global order, the regional order, and then a few comments about what it might mean for the peninsula. But clearly, Trump, the United States, Russia, China, the great power system is going to have a huge impact on the constraints and opportunities for peace going forward in Northeast Asia. And let me just say a little bit about that, focusing primarily on the United States. We're clearly watching a global spectacle. The world's most powerful country is in some sense becoming a revisionist state. It is in some sense, in a way that's disorienting to us who have been looking at American foreign policy over the decades, a country that has been at the center of an international order that now is trying to disrupt that order. It usually doesn't happen that way. It usually is great powers on the outside that are trying to knock down the great power or the superpower's order, but now it is the superpower itself which is disrupting, contesting, reorienting global rules and institutions, many of which it has built and presided over for 80 years in trade, security, environment, human rights, and so forth. So we really are in uncharted territory. The U.S. position in the world, its role in providing security, underwriting institutions is clearly in upheaval. Globally, more generally, the multilateral system of institutions there for managing interdependence and fostering global problem solving across the spectrum of issues is also, in some sense, at an historic low. The demand for global governance, for problem solving is going up. The supply based on multilateral structures of cooperation is going down. Moreover, the uncertainty level, perhaps because of that, is also increasing. It's possible for scholars, pundits to make all sorts of different predictions about the future and make credible ones, but the range of possible futures is as wide as it's been, I would argue, since the 1930s. You can think of order or disorder along a wide spectrum that's wider than any vector of scenario contingency that we've seen in many, many decades. In international relations, we are revisiting the most basic issues. Some of us are going back to the most basic questions that we've been grappling with, the books on the shelf that have been gathering dust, the classics of order and disorder. We're reading them again. We're asking those basic questions. What do we know? What do we not know about the existing order? What stock of knowledge do we have? What are the sources of order? Can democracies make a comeback? Can the US and China chart a path to coexistence? And the question that I've been grappling with over the recent years is, what is the future of liberal international order? That is to say, the cooperative organization of an open, rule-based order organized and led by a coalition of liberal democracies. I've been, in some sense, assigned the big question for this panel, and that question might be posed, is the international liberal order dead, or at least dying? And as a good academic, my answer is yes and no. Yes, certain aspects of it, certain levels of it are breaking down, what I'll call the US hegemonic order, but the deeper forces of liberal internationalism and liberal modernity are still alive to fight another day. The Aickenberry law is that the worse things get, the further back into history you have to go to see the upward arc of liberal progress. And now almost every day we have to go further back, certainly to the 1930s, maybe to the 19th century, to see that it's been a long road to get to where we've been. There have been golden eras and catastrophes, near-run things. There is always contestation in international order, always. And if you simply measure the breakdown of order from the 1990s, you're taking an anomalous year and decade, the 1990s, the early post-war period, when things seem to be going the way of liberal progress everywhere. But the longer stretch of history suggests that it's always a struggle between forces of progress and forces of reaction. And indeed, when we ask the question, what is the future of liberal internationalism, we need to remember what it is. And in some ways, there are four basic propositions that I think are still formidable. But if you want to say the liberal order is dead, you have to say that these four convictions or propositions are dead or dying. One is that open trade and exchange, properly managed, is mutually beneficial to all parties. Number two, that international institutions, properly managed, facilitate cooperation. Number three, that liberal democracies do have a comparative advantage, a cooperation advantage for organizing coalitions to reform global architecture. And number 4, the most important one, living in a world of growing complex interdependence, under conditions of growing complex interdependence, the costs of states binding themselves to international institutions and thereby the loss of state autonomy is less than the gains that are accrued from coordinating your policies. Those 4 logics, I would argue, are still with us. And so the broader stumbling forward, even in the midst of the disorder that the United States and other countries are creating, is not necessarily leading to a full breakdown of the order. What is breaking down, as I said, is the U.S. liberal hegemonic order. This is the order of 80 years. The U.S. has been at the center of this system, anchored in alliances, including the U.S.-Korean alliance, economic and security bargains with Germany and Japan. We were going to work together on economics and work together on security. U.S. support for public goods, U.S. leadership tied to liberalization of markets. That is to say that the U.S. made itself a friend of countries around the world in that it was dedicated to creating a ruly open system that would liberalize trade and create boats that would all float together. And a certain amount of what we can call strategic restraint. The U.S. would be the most powerful country in the world, but it wouldn't dominate everybody. It would restrain itself and work with others, and importantly, work within multilateral and bilateral institutions. It would tie itself to the order, and countries around the world would tie themselves to the United States. That order is definitely under strain and is breaking down in various ways. The Trump administration clearly is contesting those constraints that are at the heart of this system. And around the world, countries for 80 years have been making long-term strategic commitments with the understanding that that order would still be around, that the United States would, despite all of its vagaries and uncertainties and crazy politics in Washington, would more or less be there. Whether you're a friend or a foe or a country somewhere in between, you knew that there was a hegemonic structure that you would work against or push against, have as a basis for long-term planning. Now that is no longer certain. And so countries everywhere in the world, and this is the most important kind of general summary of what's going on today, countries around the world are having to make decisions. Do we want to ride it out, appease the United States, hope for a better time to come, or do we now begin to jump to a new type of order? And I think it's an open question where countries are going. There are some countries doing one thing, other countries doing the other, hedging, preparing plan Bs. All of this is going on. This is what we call world politics in 2025. Now, the Trump administration is clearly at the heart of this, although a lot of the upheaval is caused by larger, deeper forces that we all know about when we talk about why is liberal democracy weakening or why are governance structures more generally weakening. In that sense, Trump is as much consequence as he is cause, but he is there creating uncertainty. And as he and indeed as his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has said in his confirmation hearings, that order that I've been describing, the U.S.-led order, is now seen by the Trump administration as not something that benefits the United States, but something that hobbles the United States, that undercuts the United States, that costs more than it benefits. And that is the heart of a kind of revisionist view about America's role in the world. In some ways, it's best to see the United States as, under Trump, as a new CEO of the global liberal corporate order, a kind of almost hostile takeover of this liberal international order. And so Trump is in some sense at the center of it, making decisions like a corporate raider, you might say, looking at a corporation and saying, what do we want to keep? What do we want to sell? What do we want to raise prices on? What do we want to liquidate? Can we monetize relations? Are there new ways of generating assets? How do we renegotiate contracts? This is what I see Trump doing, and the tariff is at the heart of this, as I will mention in a moment. So what are the strategies? Some of the strategies are to sell off what Trump sees as underperforming assets, leaving the WHO, leaving the Paris Climate Accords, rewriting contracts, human rights no longer at the center of the portfolio, monetizing security relations, going back to these security ties, NATO, US Korea, US Japan, and saying, we aren't getting enough value, or you might say we aren't getting enough buck for the bang, as opposed to bang for the buck. We want to, in some sense, see more balanced cost sharing in these various alliances. Unbundling bargains is another strategy. It used to be that if you had good security ties with the United States, your economic relations with the United States would follow. That there was a kind of sense that we'll work things out because, after all, we are involved together on the most basic issues of war and peace. But that's no longer the case. The U.S., it's under Trump, can be continuing, perhaps grudgingly, to provide security, but simultaneously raising tariffs beyond any reasonable level. And then finally, if you are a new CEO of liberal world corporation, you are perhaps looking for ways to sell off all sorts of hegemonic assets. Maybe do a deal with North Korea to liquidate American holdings in the region in favor of some big, beautiful deal. Making deals is at the heart of, I think, what Trump is doing. Now, one more word about Trump before I say something about Northeast Asia. It's very hard to classify what Trump is as a foreign policy actor, what the ideas are. Is there an intellectual core? It's hard to say. Is he a nationalist? Is he an isolationist? Is he a Jacksonian? Is he a populist? These are common labels. He's certainly not an isolationist, and he's certainly not a realist in the normal sense of a restraint realist operator. But he is a kind of nationalist, populist, a kind of illiberal internationalism, or a kind of predatory hegemony where you are using your powerful position to squeeze and bully and look for ways in which you can make America great again. So in this sense, the tariff tool is an extraordinary gift to the Trump administration. Remember that tariff authority was granted to the executive branch because the thought was, coming out of the 1930s, that having Congress control trade policy was a recipe for protectionism, because representatives would try to get protection for industries in their district. So let the executive, who sees the bigger picture, to pursue a free trade system. And of course, for 80 years, that's what happened. But now it's a tool for somebody who says, oh my God, this is great. I don't like what's going on in Brazil. I'm going to raise tariffs 50%. It's a way to use Twitter to destabilize the world and make the world pay attention and do deals with Trump's Washington. So this is where I think we are at. The thread that runs through the Trump administration is the handshake, the bargain, the big, beautiful deal. And so we are all in the midst of trying to figure out how do we cope with that modus operandi in this new era. Just finally, implications for Northeast Asia. Lots of dangers, I think, are growing. I don't think the old coalition, the group of five, the US, Russia, China, South Korea, Japan, the kind of collaborative regional Northeast Asian effort towards putting pressure on North Korea to step back is going to work. Russia is transforming its relationship with North Korea. It's getting stronger and closer. US relations with China are getting weaker and more fraught. These are not working coalitions that can use the old playbook of concerted minilateral pressure. U.S.-ROK relations, I think, are also ripe for conflict. The unfortunate situation is that South Korea is one of those countries that has that double characteristic that it makes it a target, a bullseye for Trump foreign policy invective, and that is it has a trade surplus with the United States, and in various measures of defense spending, it's under measures that the Trump administration has put out there. Lots of uncertainties. Trump himself, that big, beautiful deal with his friend in North Korea. The North Korean leader is the rocket man, and Trump is the tariff man. And we will see if they can come together, but I don't necessarily think that is a deal that we would want to hope for. There are some opportunities. U.S. and China can search for the rules of the game. There is a moment, and it will certainly come, if not during the Trump years, but sometime when there is a more coherent, disciplined relationship between Washington and Beijing, and there could be, in the aftermath of that, a more cooperative effort towards stabilizing and looking for peace terms on the Korean peninsula. Pragmatic, small steps, focus on preventing miscalculation and risk-taking. In a world turned upside down, those sorts of steps are, in my view, the best we can hope for. Thank you.